Hi, welcome to our weekly Sunday online from what normally would have been Christ Church St. James, the building, but due to a bit of illness, my son's backyard will work out just fine. So that's where I am at the moment. We've been meeting like this is our third year now, to connect with our friends from Christ Church St. James, but also to reach out far beyond the walls of that building and making many new friends. So I'm very thankful that you would join us today. If it's your first time joining us, we've been reflecting through what's known as the Gospel of John, a portrait or biography about Jesus, and just asking ourselves some pretty obvious questions. Who is Jesus? What did he do? What's he all about? How does that connect with us at all? What would our lives look like if we took this seriously? So, questions like that. But we're just trying to let the Bible do the talking as we reflect upon what we hear. So, again, thank you for joining us. We're just going to pray and trust God to speak into our lives right where we are, okay? Thank you. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this opportunity to gather this way. And I pray that as we listen to the words from the Gospel of John, that we will hear them not just with our ears, but in the very depth of our being. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. John chapter 18. If you happen to have a copy, you might want to open it up and follow along. If you haven't got a copy, I should just mention that we'd be delighted to send you one. Our information is at the very end of this video as to how to get a hold of us. So just say, please send me a Gospel of John or a New Testament, and we'll be delighted to do that right away. Okay? Here we go. John chapter 18, beginning at verse 1. Just going to read one verse first of all. After saying these things, Jesus crossed the Kidron Valley with his disciples and entered a grove of olive trees. Okay. After saying these things. After saying what things? Well, if you read the previous chapter, chapter 17, you see a prayer of Jesus. And in that prayer, we noticed for the last couple of weeks, 7 gifts that Jesus gives to those who follow him. So after saying those things, speaking about what it means to know God, eternal life, speaking about what it means to have his word, not just in our hands, but in our heart, letting it shape us. Speaking to us about a joy that the world can't take away, no matter how difficult or challenging life might get. Speaking to us about a commission, a trust, to go and live the way that Jesus wants us to live, the way the world needs us to live, as people who love with all our heart and share with all of our faith. Speaking about what it means to live it out, to experience a glory, which means a change in from who we were to who we can become if we just trust God with our lives. And the last 2, speaking about a love that actually is life-changing and the actual promise of his presence in our lives day by day, moment by moment. These are the 7 gifts that Jesus outlined in John chapter 17. So after saying these things, right, in prayer, then we read that he crossed what's known as the Kidron Valley with his 11 disciples to a grove of olive trees. The other accounts of Jesus' life gives us a name for that location as Gethsemane. Now, why would he go to Gethsemane? We read in the next verse, that verse 2, Judas the betrayer knew this place because Jesus had often gone there with his disciples. So this place was a familiar place for Jesus. It was a place of quiet and of rest. It was a place of focus. Now, when I read that, I just stop for a second to ask myself, I ask you, have you got a kind of a familiar place where you meet Jesus? A quiet place. Maybe it's a park somewhere, I walk not too far from here to a park, and I really appreciate that. Maybe it's a space in your own home that you've kind of unofficially or otherwise dedicated for that purpose of just, when I'm in that place in my home, that's when I'm intentionally still and prayerful and reflecting. In my own past, we used to live in St. John, New Brunswick, and alongside our home was a big hill full of blueberries. So yeah, it was Blueberry Hill. And remember many, many times late at night just stepping outside and going down the driveway and walking up that hill and just knowing that that was a place just to be still before God under this beautiful starry sky and just to listen. And in another place that we lived, we had this one beat up chair that I just called the Jesus and Me chair. And it was a place where my Bible was right alongside it. And I just intentionally was still and I sat in that chair, wanting to hear Jesus speak into my life. So in this case, you may have your own example of that. But Jesus had that. That's what I'm getting at. This place, Gethsemane, was a special place for Jesus, obviously, and for his disciples. And he knew when he went there on this occasion, it'd only be a few hours before evil came knocking on the door, right? I mean, he needed a place to be quiet, to be peaceful, just once more before the darkness rolled in. So, speaking of which, look at verse 3. The leading priests and Pharisees had given Judas a contingent of Roman soldiers and temple guards to accompany him. And now, with blazing torches and lanterns and weapons, they arrived at this olive grove. I mean, Judas, he knows the place. He's been there so many times with Jesus. Undoubtedly, for Judas, he's been taught there about the kingdom of heaven. He's been inspired there by Jesus. He's found rest there. He has prayed there with Jesus. But now, he's coming for a very different reason. And it isn't about peace. He's not coming to learn. He's not coming to be inspired. He's not coming to pray. He's not coming to rest. No, he's come for one purpose, and that's to betray Jesus. And you see who comes along with Judas. We're told the whole contingent of Roman soldiers. Now that's an interesting word in the Greek, because it could mean as many as 1,000 soldiers, or as few as 200 soldiers. But even if it's the latter, even if it's just 200 soldiers, what does this suggest to you? It suggests to us, doesn't it, that they expected a bit of a fight. I mean, look at their numbers and look at their weapons. They either expected Jesus and his merry band of 11 men to battle or to run like crazy and hide, which explains the lanterns and the lamps, the flaming torches. I mean, clearly, if nothing else, there was a great respect here shown in that they realized just how powerful this man could be, this Jesus. I mean, this man had calmed and raging storms, right? This man had delivered people from the demonic. This man had even raised the dead. I mean, the point is they knew something about his powerful capabilities. But it's really clear they knew nothing about his purpose or his character. They didn't appreciate that Jesus was not being caught by surprise. They thought they were in control of this arrest. No, they quickly learned that Jesus was in charge of his own arrest. I mean, look at these verses, verse 4 to 6. Jesus fully realized all that was going to happen to him. So he stepped forward to meet them. Who are you looking for? He asked. Jesus the Nazarene, they replied. I am he, Jesus said. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with him. And as Jesus said, I am he, they all drew back and fell to the ground. I mean, No surprise again here to Jesus. He's clear. He's calm. He's not running. He's not hiding. And he's not putting up a fight. But he's a man who is completely in step with his Father's will. And so, being completely in step with his Father's will, he calmly steps forward to meet this massive crowd of soldiers. And he asks them, "Who are you looking for?" And they answer, "Jesus of Nazareth." And here says, "I am he," or as it can be translated, I am is here, or I am the Lord. I mean, he makes no secret of his identity. I am the Lord. And he follows that by a demonstration of his power. They all fall backwards. Isn't this incredible? There could be no question now in their minds. This man they've come to hunt down could knock them all down with just a word. I mean, they've got swords. They've got spears. They've got lanterns and torches. His word is the sword. And he himself is the light the world so desperately needs. They all fell, including Judas, it says. Now, Judas, he'd already fallen, hadn't he? In terms of loyalty, honor, trust, integrity. But now, he and all those who had marched in with him were humbled before Christ. It reminds us, doesn't it, of Philippians chapter 2. At the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Look at verse 7. Once more, Jesus asked them, "Who are you looking for?" Now, it's interesting that Jesus would ask them a second time. And I wonder, putting myself in the sandals of some of those Roman soldiers, if I can, I wonder if they were tracing themselves to ground too. I mean, would they be thrown to the ground again when he answered the question? But they asked the question again, maybe timidly, maybe cautiously. We're looking for Jesus the Nazarene. And then in verse 8, Jesus says, "I told you, I am he. And since I'm the one you want, let these others go." Again, who's in control? He's in control. And notice his demands. Not his request, his demands. And notice his concern. It's not about himself. It's for his friends. Let these others go. I mean, this was protective friendship. It was also prophetic fulfillment. Because then we read in verse 9, he did this to fulfill his own statement. I did not lose a single one of those you've given me. I just realized when I said that he hasn't changed, has he? He's still all about protective friendship. Come unto me, all those who are weary and heavy laden, and I'll refresh you. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. Or as we read a few chapters ago, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd cares for his sheep. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. Protective friendship. All right, verse 10. This is kind of dramatic. Then Simon Peter drew a sword, and he slashed off the right ear of Malchus, the high priest's slave. Yikes. I mean, there's a whole lot that can be said here. But a quick observation. Number one, this is misguided loyalty. Jesus said his kingdom is not of this world, so what's with the sword? Secondly, Peter had just witnessed, hadn't he? What Jesus could do with just his word, knocking the whole bunch down with just his word. Had it not sunk in yet for Peter, you don't need a sword. But the third thing, misguided or otherwise, we still see great impulsive courage, don't we, in Peter? I mean, he is ready to fight, no matter how insanely outnumbered they were. So in some ways we can really be inspired, can't we? By Peter. Not by the violence, no. Never by the violence. But by the loyalty. He wasn't afraid to stand for Jesus. Don't we give him full marks for that? I think we do. Look at the response of Jesus, though, in verse 11. Jesus says to Peter, "Put your sword back in its sheath. Shall I not drink from the cup of suffering the Father has given to me?" Again, I'm just taking with the authority of Jesus, the calm, the compassion of Jesus, as well as the confidence of Jesus in the Father's will. Again, those words from Philippians chapter 2. Jesus, being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. He made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even the death of the cross. I mean, this is our model, isn't it? We read in Romans chapter 12, to bring it down to where you and I are right now. Here's what Jesus would have us do. Bless those who persecute you. Don't curse them. Pray God will bless them. Be happy with those who are happy. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with each other. Don't be too proud to enjoy the company of ordinary people. Don't think you know it all. Never pay back evil with evil. Do things in such a way that everyone can see you're honorable. Do all you can to live in peace with everyone. Never take revenge. Leave that to the righteous anger of God. Yeah. Instead, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If your enemies are thirsty, give them something to drink. In doing this, you'll heap burning coals of shame on their heads. And I loved how it ends. Don't let evil conquer you, but conquer evil by doing good. Yeah. So that's really kind of scene one, if you like, of this little chapter. And if you want a title, I'd just put the title Power Controlled. Power control. That's what we see in Jesus. He's got all the power, but he's controlling it because of the plan of God. All right, let's pick up on scene two, a shorter scene. I would just call this scene, by the way, political corruption. And I think you'll see why now. Look at verse 12. The soldiers, their commanding officer, and the temple guards arrested Jesus and tied him up. They tied him up. They bound him. Why would they do that? Well, because they see him as a threat. I mean, this is the man, remember this, this is the man who'd set people free from all kinds of chains that held them back. Be it diseases, be it demons. This is the man who'd opened blind eyes. This is the man who'd made lame people walk. This is the man who raised the dead. So cords, chains, they wouldn't do the trick. Jesus was only bound to his Father's will. And the only cords he knew, and the only cords he knows today, are woven out of compassion for humanity and loyalty to his Father. Those are the cords, not the ones these guys put on him. Look at verse 13 and 14. First they took him to Annas, the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest at that time. Now Caiaphas was the one who had told the other Jewish leaders, it's better that one man should die for the people. So, two guys, Annas and Caiaphas, quite a notorious duo. I mean, words that historians have used to try to describe these two include cruel, malignant, unscrupulous, and those are the nice words. Yeah, quite a pair. We read that in verse 14, that it was Caiaphas who was the one to say it's better that one man should die for his people. If you go back to John chapter 11, verse 49 to 53, you'll see that. One of them, named Caiaphas, who was the high priest, spoke up. He said, "You don't realize it's better for one man to die for all the people than for the whole nation to perish." And then we read, he didn't say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not just for that nation, but for the scattered children of God everywhere, to bring them together and make them one. I mean, the point here in this scene, their minds are already made up way before there's a trial, right? I mean, they've been planning this for ages. This is the ultimate sham. We see it often still, don't we, in our world? Truth is always the first victim of war. We may be familiar with somebody right now who is suffering incredible injustice. I mean, you may have experienced all kinds of unfair trials and treatment in all kinds of ways. Maybe you're going through something now which is really crummy and not fair. I would just say, please know this. I hope this helps. Jesus understands what you're going through. He went through it. Yeah. Political corruption. Yeah, I know. It's supposed to get us upset. It does get us upset. There's a right time to stand up in the name of righteousness, right? There's a thing called righteous anger. There really is. Scene 3, verses 15 to 18. I'll just call it paralyzed courage. Simon Peter followed Jesus, as did another one of his disciples. That other disciple was acquainted with the high priest, so he was allowed to enter the high priest's courtyard with Jesus. Peter had to stay outside the gate. Then the disciple who knew the high priest spoke to the woman watching at the gate, and she let Peter in. The woman asked Peter, "You're not one of that man's disciples as well, are you?" "No," he said, "I'm not." Because it was cold, the household servants and the guards had made a charcoal fire, and they stood around it, warming themselves. And Peter stood with them, warming himself. So here's Peter again. If nothing else, this man is no quitter. He just attacked the slave of the high priest with a sword, slicing off his ear. Most likely, by the way, he wasn't aiming for the ear, right? But here he is in the very courtyard of that same high priest. Why? He can't turn himself away from Jesus, that's why. I mean, even after all of his colleagues but one have fled, Peter could not abandon Jesus. I mean, he'd made mistakes, yeah. He didn't understand what Jesus was even talking about half the time. He stumbled, and he'd stumble again, by the way, in a minute. But he would fail where others never even tried. I really admire that about him. He would fail where others didn't even try. And I'm sure all of us could use a friend like that sometimes. Do you agree? Perhaps you've been that kind of a friend for somebody in the past. You haven't been perfect, but you've cared in the best way you've known how. And if so, I would just say more power to you. People need friends like that. So how did Peter get access to the high priest's courtyard? Well, we read that the other disciple was acquainted with the high priest, so he was allowed to enter the high priest's courtyard, and he spoke to the woman at the gate, and she let him in. There was a connection there. Most likely, by the way, it was John, the one who wrote this account. Some kind of connection with the high priest, probably, by the way, people suggest through business. I mean, John and his family were fishermen, and most likely the high priest benefited by purchasing fish from the family. So there was a connection. So there's John and there's Peter. But again, the other 9, they're gone. We don't know where they are. I ask myself, I ask you, kind of picture yourself in this scene. Where are you? Are you in that courtyard, staying close to Jesus? Are you risking? Or are you like the other 9? Nowhere to be found. Running, hiding? Are you ready to speak up? Or are you going to be silent? I mean, bring it back to right now. I ask myself, where am I? Where are you as a disciple of Jesus? When it's not always popular to identify with Jesus. When those around you hold a very different worldview than you do. One that doesn't seem to be in a sync with the heartbeat of Jesus. When those closest to you, perhaps, suggest some kind of an outing that would compromise your convictions. That would be like a flashing amber light for you. I mean, listen to what Peter himself would write later on to believers who were scattered right across the Roman Empire, trying to live out their faith in a hostile culture. Here's what Peter said to them. Remember, you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. You are God's special possession. Why? That you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Yeah. So, the first test, though, of Peter's loyalty here, and on the surface, it looks like an easy one. I mean, it's a servant girl. And the servant girl says to Peter, you're not also one of the man's disciples, are you? See the word also? That suggests the servant girl, she knew the other disciple, most likely John, was a follower of Jesus. So when she sees Peter, she kind of does some simple math, John's a follower of Jesus. I wonder if Peter's a follower of Jesus. And you'd think, it's easy for us to say, that Peter could have nodded agreement. Yeah, I am. But he didn't, right? He didn't. He said, no, I'm not. Now, I'm not throwing any stones at Peter. There may have been times in my own life, I'm sure there have been. I shouldn't even say there may have been. There have been times when I look back and I realize I could have said something. I could have helped. I could have spoken up. But I missed the opportunity. So perhaps it's easy for us to relate to Peter this time around. But then Peter, we see, stands with others, warming himself. Seems to be an attempt here for Peter this to kind of blend in, keep a low profile if you like. Why? Well, he's in a bit of danger, isn't he? He knows it. Being noticed as a disciple of Jesus. I ask myself, regardless, I haven't been in Peter's shoes, but are there times when I just want to blend in, not to be noticed, just to fit in, to go along with the crowd? Are there times when I'm more concerned about my reputation than I am about my responsibility as a Christian? It's a good question to ask. Not to be a downer, but just to help us do better, right? Last little bit, verse 25 to 27. As Simon Peter was standing by the fire warming himself, they asked him again, you're not one of his disciples, are you? He denied it. No, I'm not. But one of the household slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, said, didn't I see you there in the olive grove with Jesus? And again, Peter denied it. And immediately a rooster crowed. So, just going to sum up here. Peter's watching Jesus from a distance, trying to fit in, blend in, one of the crowd. But it's not working for him. And again, he says, I'm not. There's heat by the fire, for sure. But there's a more intense heat, isn't there, happening for Peter? It's uncomfortable for him. You're not also one of his disciples, are you? I mean, if this was a baseball game, that's strike two already. And the last pitch comes from a relative of a man who had experienced Peter's sword moment earlier. One of the slaves who was present in the garden when Peter took a swipe at that man. Didn't I see you with my own eyes? I mean, it's like being a deer in the headlights for Peter right now. And there's no wiggle room. But his response, he denies it. And just as Jesus had prophesied a few chapters earlier, John chapter 13, that before the rooster crowed, Peter would deny Jesus 3 times. Paralyzed courage is what I call it, followed by a deep sense of regret and shame. In fact, Luke tells us that Peter ran off and he wept bitterly. He let down his Lord. If only he could turn the clock back a little bit, you know? Again, to close, have there been occasions, I'm just asking you to ask yourself, when you'd wished you'd spoken up, stood up, you wished you'd reached out to care, maybe somebody was just in need, needed help, and for whatever reason, you let it slip by. You lacked the courage, you might have lacked the compassion. I would suggest that I'm not the only one who can say that's true. But here's the good news. Well, Peter struck out on this occasion, and he did. He would get another chance up to bat, and he would hit a grand slam. I mean, you run through the book of Acts and you see it, and you read the 2 letters that we have of his in the New Testament. I mean, what we get is this: setbacks are inevitable, but new opportunities are always possible. An old friend of mine once said, if you haven't the faith to do what you know is right, do what you would do if you did have the faith. Isn't that good? If you haven't the faith to do what you know is right, do what you would do if you did have the faith. And that includes kindly telling somebody about the difference Jesus is making in your life. Humbly, I emphasize the word kindly. Courage paralyzed? No thank you. Courage restored? Count me in. We pray together. Father, I thank you for this time to reflect through John, and I do pray that we will find ourselves with a restored courage, a courage that is also marked with compassion, great conviction, and a great confidence that you are doing something grand in us and through us, and for all those we love and care about. I would ask your blessing on my friends now, that they will feel inspired and encouraged to live the faith and to live it well. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you deeply.